y'all feeling this shit, know what I mean?
Hi everyone, welcome to our first in-person Unlocking Data Series recording and live show. So it's really good to have with us here, OG, Omer. It's good to see that your initials actually match your name.
Yeah.
So I was just fascinated by that. But it's really good to have Omer here with us from Polkastarter Gaming. He's the head of Polkastarter Gaming. So we're going to just have a general, pretty much fireside chat on the gaming ecosystem in general. We're going to talk about games, and how games are sort of progressing, the games that are going to come up, because there's a lot coming in the pipeline. We're going to talk about, the gamers, because of course there's no gaming without the gamers. And then we're going to talk about guilds, given the fact that of course you guys are heading one of the successful guilds right now and how you've changed your business models and stuff like that. So we're going to deep dive. So we'll start up. So my name's Praveen. I'm the co-founder of Ithium. And it's nice to be here once again recording in person. And we have Omer here, so just give us a bit of a background, Omer, just where you started, specifically when you started in traditional gaming and sort of your progression towards this. It would be good for everyone to hear the background.
Sure, yeah. I mean, first of all, thank you so much for having us and having me here. So my background's a bit different, I think, from a lot of people that are in crypto. I am a gamer first. I'm not a crypto, finance VC person first. So I actually studied marketing. I worked with L'Oreal on brand. I worked with Dubai Tourism, Visit Dubai, a lot of different Dubai, semi-government, government, private entities, all from like a social media side, right? And then my direction was always towards gaming because I'm a gamer myself ever since I was 4, so it's 21, 22 years ago now. And naturally, now that I had this talent and the skill of doing social media marketing for brands and things like that, I wanted to kind of work with gaming. And so I worked with Ubisoft, Nvidia, Riot Games, Epic Games, a lot of different kind of Middle East tournaments based in Saudi, based in the UAE, acquiring players for these tournaments, setting up the tournaments themselves, doing the social media for them, and at the same time worked with a lot of like Middle East based influencers and things like that. My first interaction with crypto, I think, is very similar to a lot of people, where you just you trade a few tokens here and there, you're starting to understand it. But as soon as I found Web3 gaming, I think that's when the light bulb lit up, where I was like, I understand gaming more than anything. I'd rather focus on what I know than trying to learn something completely different, which is like me trying to pretend that I understand DeFi, staking protocols, lending, loans, etc. So funny enough, I mean, Polkastarter has been around now maybe for 2 years. I reached out to the founding team members with a very simple message that was, I like what you guys are doing, but I think you should focus on gaming. Because I've always, and until today, I still believe that mass adoption, the way we define it, it will most likely happen through gaming. Because gamers are very familiar with digital assets. We know what it's like to own something that doesn't exist in real life. We know what it's like to, buy a skin and never, really touch that skin in real life if you're playing Fortnite or League of Legends or whatever. And for me, it was like a no-brainer to try to first onboard those people and then try to focus on everyone else, because gradually everyone will come along once the technology gets better. But as a gamer, like, it's a no-brainer for me, right? So that was kind of the cold outreach message. And at the time, Polkastarter was trying to focus and maybe pivot and shift and open up more doors to kind of be a bit more involved in gaming beyond obviously doing the fundraising stuff. So I think it was a perfect timing, perfect opportunity. And ever since I joined, that's when everything kind of fell in place, with the guild, with the platform, with the community, with everything else that we're doing now, whether it's investment advisory and so on.
Great, awesome background. And I think the Dubai angle is always great, because I think being here, being a part of the growing ecosystem, and then having that real world experience behind you. But you're spot on. I think the fact that you mentioned that gaming is what is going to drive adoption, right? And I think that is really what we are seeing as well, coming into this space as a data project and looking at these different verticals, right? And we're trying to find out which one works best. and we find so much alignment with gaming, because they understand things so much better, right? Like as you said, they understand the virtuality of it. They don't expect anything physical.
Yep, 100%.
Right.
So I mean, I think it's also like the fact that you've been around for so long as a gamer, you saw what it was like before, right? Like I remember when I was maybe 15, 16, all the propaganda about gaming was that it was bad, right?
Yes.
Now if you look at the shift, everyone's trying to sell gamers stuff. Like all the brands are partnering up with video games. Fortnite has so many different deals happening every single day, and it's just like you start to see that people now value the gamers more because they know that we spend in game, right? Like we spend money on stuff that we actually genuinely love, and we have so many different touch points in games. Like if you're talking about, marketing on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, that's like one touch point. Like you have to go into the app and there's only one way of showing you that ad, right? Whether it's a story or whatever. But in a game, it could be so many different things. It could be the billboard sign in the open world. It could be the clothing. It could be an item. It could be something in the menu. So many different touch points. So I think it's a no-brainer for, obviously crypto, but also in general, just brands to start focusing on gaming. It's refreshing. I've been playing video games for 21 plus years, and now it's like, okay, people care about us. It's interesting to watch people fight for your attention compared to previously when it was like, oh yeah, bad for you, go outside, touch some grass, blah, blah, blah. Now it's like, oh, please, like watch this ad, not that ad. Please play this game, not that game. So it's really interesting to see how it evolved.
Plus, not just that, I think there's a lot of celebrities getting into it as well now, right? Like whereas before, nobody really got much into it.
Yep.
I mean, you've got Fortnite hosting, I guess
concerts
and shows and stuff like that, which I couldn't even imagine, right? Like happening back in the day.
Exactly.
Right. So we're going to just go through, three sort of elements. We're going to look at games a bit more in depth, the traditional gaming ecosystem, how it's evolved as you've been through that journey. So starting with games, I've got some written notes here. I've got actual printed paper, which is good to have for a change instead of looking at my screen. So the Web3 space is heating up. Right, it's sort of I think been in very sort of hibernation over the past few months, but a lot of games coming up down the track. So keen to know your view on these games that are coming up, because I even attended a session a couple of days back where there's an FPS game that's coming up where they were rejigging their whole tokenomics because everything's changed. When they designed it at the start of the year, it had a different purpose, but now they had to literally spend hours and hours rejigging this to make sure that they cover the future evolution of games, right?
Yep.
So looking at that, just your view on what these games should really be focusing on coming up, they should probably, how are they going to pivot? So there's some thoughts on that would be awesome to hear your angle.
Yeah, I think, obviously the space has shifted over the past couple of months. It hasn't been too long since, Thetan and Axie and these games came out, but I think now you're seeing a lot more focus on quality. I think games are starting to realize that they're not fighting with one another for a Web3 gamer's attention. They're fighting with Call of Duty, Fortnite, League of Legends for gamers' attention in general. So traditional gamers, right? You talk about, the numbers are always funny to me, but the overall market is essentially 3.1 billion gamers worldwide, right? You look at Web3 gamers and they argue that it's 2 million because there are 2 million registered wallets with GameFi apps. I highly suspect that the number is a lot lower. There are a lot of bots, there are a lot of multiple accounts per user and things like that. So I would say you're probably in the 100,000s. Maybe you could have cracked 1 million, but that's kind of like just an optimistic guess, right? So for me, it doesn't make any sense to focus on that piece of the puzzle, on that kind of slice where everyone's fighting for the same attention. There's so much more attention outside. There are billions literally of gamers that are just waiting for new fun experiences. And I feel like just because you're building a game in Web3 doesn't mean the game has to be lower quality than a traditional game. So I think the space was kind of headed somewhere completely wrong, which was the focus on the earning element, right? We saw the transition from play to earn to play and earn to now people are talking about free to own and play to own and all sorts of different models. I think it's a lot simpler than that. I don't think there's anything wrong from a business model perspective with what Fortnite does, having a battle pass and selling skins, nothing else. I think that as a business model is a lot more sustainable than what people tried to do with the dual token, economies, where essentially you understand the logic behind it and why you need a second token because you don't want the governance main token to get affected by supply and demand. But at the same time, it was like, yeah, but as you acquire more players, the value of the token goes down. So the more players you have, the less valuable the earning, and so it just didn't make any sense. And all these games were self-imploding essentially, with all their, I guess, also initial target audience walking away from them because the earning was not as exciting. Because when you say play to earn, like that, as simple as it is, the shift from to and, it was so powerful, because play to earn means I'm playing to earn. I'm only playing to make money.
Yes.
As soon as the money stops, I'm not playing. But play and earn was kind of like a side-by-side thing, where it's like you can earn, but you also cannot earn, but you're still playing the game for the sole purpose of having fun. So I think there's a shift there for sure, in terms of the focus as well on kind of traditional games, traditional gamers from all of these new games. Like Undead Blocks, for example, is one of my favorite games, because the guys in Wagyu and Grant and all of them are essentially focusing primarily on nostalgia. People that have played Call of Duty Zombies will love to play a new Zombies game, and so their target is just that. Their target is not Web3 gamers. Their target is not someone specific within our industry. They're trying to get as many people in as possible, and to do that, they've lowered the barrier to entry. So if you look back at Axie a couple of months ago, until now, technically, you still have to buy the Axies to play the game.
Yes.
For me, as a gamer that plays Call of Duty and I buy it once in like a $50 transaction, doesn't make any sense to put $1,000 down to try your game with the potential of making an upside, right? Games like Undead Blocks now are letting you play for free, so it's free to play. And there's no wallet integration that you have to go through before playing the game. You could just download the launcher. And so this is what's really making a shift, where people are now asking questions of game studios and game developers of like, why is it not free to play? Why do I have to buy an NFT? Why is it not a launcher? Why, like all these different questions. I think it's almost like the taste is going up as well. Like people are starting to realize, it doesn't have to be a bad game just because it's Web3. Like it should also be up to a standard. So games like Undead Blocks, Big Time is another one that we're super keen on. I think Illuvium's doing great things. Phantom Galaxies, all these games that are just like showing you really high quality stuff compared to what you've seen before, but also on par with the industry standard. I think that's what is driving the change in the space. Great
input there. And you touched on a couple of points which I'd like to talk a bit more about, because I read a recent article where you spoke about bots in the space, right? And I thought that was an interesting element, because there was some software now that basically gives you a view of how many bots are in the system, right? So, and you had some interesting comments there with that, so I thought it'd be nice for our community to hear your views on that, because these clicking games, essentially, they're bot prone.
100%.
And that was the idea behind it.
If your entire game core loop is you click to earn tokens, there's absolutely nothing that's going to stop that game from getting botted to the core, right? Like the fact that I could just make a program that just clicks and that equals earning will always mean that more and more people will think along the same lines. They'll say, how can I make multiple programs? How can I have multiple bots at the same time? Farms of bots almost that are, essentially accumulating tokens for me. That's why we say it's not about the play to earn, right? Like it shouldn't be about that, because all those games are play to earn focused. Like they're solely, click next, complete, done, click next. Like you could literally just click the same buttons over and over again with no fun element to it, right? Like it's not even that, you're using your mind, your imagination, it's nothing. It's absolutely, it's almost like these idle RPGs, which I don't understand personally. It does have its audience, but I don't understand the point of having an idle simulated game where you're not really doing anything, because that's not really fun. I'd rather watch someone play a game, but I wouldn't watch my game play itself. You know what I mean? So it was an interesting study though, because it identified exactly what I was saying earlier, that there are so many wallets connected to games, but you can't verify that each wallet is a person. And I can have 10 wallets, but it doesn't mean that it's 10 players, right? So I think a lot of these games will continue to exist. They still do exist. They still have a large player base. They still get thousands and thousands of players because of obviously the transactions, the value, the money, etc. But realistically speaking, they're not going to be on the same level in terms of the conversations we have about games in the next 6 to 12 months. Games are now looking at fun core loops, replayability, addictive gameplay, graphics, constant updates, like all the stuff that you're used to in the traditional space. And so there's no point in going back to these games and saying, oh, I'm going to invest all my time in this click to earn type model, right? It doesn't make any sense. So I think it was an eye opener for a lot of people, because even for us, we talk about our Discord community, and I think we'll touch on that in a bit. Like we say we have 70,000 members in our community, and I know a certain number of that is definitely bots, because there's nothing stopping bots from getting into a Discord server that could potentially give you an upside of winning prizes, giveaways, etc. And I know that the same 70,000 in my Discord are in Avocado's Discord, in Ancient 8's Discord, in YGG's Discord. So we're all literally talking to the exact same people. And so I think the space is still in its infancy. So when game studios come and talk to me about like AAA and we're doing this and we're doing that, it's like you're doing all of that for maximum 100,000 players in the entire space. You need to do that for the 3.1 billion. You know what I mean? Like that should be the focus in the end of the day. Not everyone that's already in, because everyone that's already in will play your game.
Yeah.
If your game's good, they'll pick it up because there's not much to do in the space. Everyone that's outside is who you should be focusing on.
Yeah, so I guess the focus should be on drawing more into the ecosystem as opposed to just recycling what's in the ecosystem, right? And it's and how you've explained it, right? I thought that was quite interesting because you spoke about traditional games and how it shifted focus to this click to earn, essentially, right? Over the past few years, basically, with the advent of Axie and that genre of games, right? And now it's going backwards, back to
its
the origins.
Yep, basically.
Right? Where gaming is actually a fun activity, where it is something that you like doing and like spending time on, as opposed to just sitting and clicking, right?
Yep.
So it's a good transition. I think it's great for the ecosystem as a whole. It's going to bring in more from outside, and that's going to be the key, really. I mean, rather than having the existing ecosystem members in there. But we also want to talk a bit more about things like, I think there are other aspects as well. There's a smurfing aspect where you have basically, veterans smurfing up new accounts and playing with those just to get in. Right? Like that, do you think there'll be an issue down the track with the newer genre of games coming up, or?
I don't think so, because smurfing still exists in like League of Legends, for example. I smurf on League of Legends. Like I have a platinum account in Europe Nordic, and I still go and play on the NA server with like a bronze account. And when people play against me, they're like, he's definitely not a bronze. So it's still a normal thing. I think it depends on the sole purpose of smurfing and why you're doing it and how you can control it. So for example, if you are playing on multiple accounts and it's a tournament and you're then ruining the experience for everyone in the competition because it's the same person winning the entire prize pool, like that's a bit of an issue, and you probably need to then have like certain rules against multi accounts and things like that. But if it's smurfing in the sense of like I'm just a really good player, I've managed to rank up to, because smurfing also sometimes comes from a good reason. Like for example, you reach a certain rank and it's harder to find matches.
Yes.
But you like the game, so you want to go back to like when it was easy.
Yeah.
And you're going to get that account back up, but then you'll just go and start a new one. So sometimes smurfing happens for good reasons. One of our guys that plays on that blocks and represents PGG is a former Fortnite pro. And so like you could argue, he's smurfing because it looks like he's not really a good gamer, blah, 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 but he's technically like just a previous pro that now is enjoying this new game. Yeah. And if he then decides to make a new account, just because he can't find matches or whatever in certain games, then you can't really blame him for it.
True.
I'm against multiple accounts in tournaments and competitions because I think it ruins the entire experience. If it's a top 10 leaderboard type thing and there's 1,000 players but there's one guy winning all 5 top spots, it's a bit harsh on the entire community in general. It's another thing to just allow people to play on multiple accounts and maybe different servers. Maybe I start big time as a warrior, a time warrior, and then I decide I don't like this approach, let me start as a Shadow Blade. Does that mean that I shouldn't play the game anymore? Does that mean that I shouldn't? It's a lot of different questions.
But you're right in the fact that it's not really a bad thing, right? It's not something that it's not a bad thing always in specific, competitive scenarios. Obviously, it's disadvantaging others, right? Like who are genuinely in the tournament to win something. But I see that example even when I used to play traditional games. So you play up to a certain level and you just get so frustrated.
Yeah, the level becomes either too high or there's just not enough lobbies. Like I know I forget the guy's name, but one of the guys in the esports scene, the entire reason that their esports entity started was that he reached a certain rank where he could no longer find games. Yes. And then he wanted to then still play the game, so he would go into competitive tournaments because that's the only place he could find people on his level. Yeah. And then he realized I'm really good at this, let me build a team. And then they've turned into an esports, or I think it was Optic Gaming if I'm not mistaken. It depends on where it's coming from. I guess that's my answer. Like if it comes for good reason, great. Bad reason, not so great.
Well, it's interesting to talk about it anyway and look at that aspect. Now we talked about esports. Right, I think that's been always something that's been in the past, and you mentioned you've participated in a lot of these tournaments and stuff like that in the past, especially the Middle Eastern region where you're based. But tell me a bit about that. How is that evolving, and sort of do you see any way in which this could transition into a Web3 element, or there still seems to be a bit of friction from that sort of community, that sort of ecosystem to get into this space due to various reasons? But do you see a situation where these two could work together, coexist, potentially some esports sort of getting more into the Web3 ecosystem?
and I think esports is a very easy way to onboard more players, because when you have esports, you have esports players. When you have esports players, you have their audiences. When you have their audiences, they're watching the game. That's how a lot of these games got popular. Like when you think Fortnite, back in the day at least, now it's a bit different. When you think Fortnite, you thought Ninja, because Ninja used to stream Fortnite. He was one of the top players. When you thought, Call of Duty, you had specific players, streamers, etc. When you thought League of Legends, you thought, LOL Tyler 1, etc., etc. And so whenever you have an esports component to your game, it typically comes with like a streamability aspect as well, because no esports player is typically just playing behind closed doors. All of them want to flex, how good they are, and they want to show all their clips and, oh my god, look at me killing 5 guys, blah blah blah. So it really gives you that edge from a social component, and I think it's definitely something that has to be taken very, very seriously. I do know a lot of esports organizations are looking to enter the space, so we talk to a lot of them as well that are trying to maybe talk to guilds and see if guilds should evolve into esports teams. I think it's already happening, to be fair.
Yes.
But esports teams, from the traditional space are trying to get in. I think the one missing piece was that games were not good enough for esports players. Like, there was no good FPS game for a Call of Duty player to drop his game and then come into Web3. I think it's slightly starting to change. I don't think we're there yet, but for example, EV.io is kind of perfect to have a tournament on. Games like The Harvest, obviously a lot of potential there to have esports tournaments. A lot more games that are going to come out and allow players to essentially compete at a very high level. And then you start getting into a conversation of, this esports team is better than that esports team, and these guys are the world champions, and blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
And with that comes a lot of streamability, a lot of content, a lot of, community engagement. So I think it's super critical. Without esports, I don't think League of Legends would have reached where it is now, as one of the, arguably the biggest game, largest name and brand in the space. Without esports, I don't think Counter-Strike gets as far as it did, without the Kenny S's and all the famous names back in the day. And I think it's the same for all these games. So esports will only take the game to the next level. It doesn't have to be every single game, but the games that have the capabilities, definitely we should be pushing esports and more tournaments. I think it's a challenge at first, but once you figure out the system and how you're going to organize these things, and there's infrastructure partners that you could work with, like community gaming and things like that, where you could set up automatically your tournaments. But once you figure that out, I think it's just a recipe for a lot more adoption and a lot more exposure for your games.
That's true, and I think more and more of, like, I was thinking more on the lines of like Web3, like a Web3 esports, a tournament where you have the veterans playing games, and it's open for all to go and see. I mean, do you think that's still a long way off?
No, I don't think it's that far off. I don't think it's that far off.
Soon?
Actually, I don't know if I should mention this. But, okay, I'm not going to mention names. There's a tournament that's coming up, and we're invited as one of the teams, and one of the other teams has Apex pros, and then one of the other teams has like the best players from that game, and so it's a very esporty type angle with just like 4 or 5 teams invited, and we're all going head to head to then compete. Fantastic. So there's stuff like this that's already happening. I don't think it's too far off. I do think that no esports pro is going to go full on Web3 yet.
Yes.
Because it's way too soon, not enough good games. You'll play it, but you'll get bored after a while. Apex and Fortnite and Call of Duty and CSGO are just way better right now. But I feel like the shift will happen, and I was actually discussing this earlier. I feel like it's almost like Web3 gaming is giving a new lifeline to former retired esports pros. Because if, for example, if you're like 24, 25, 26, you're probably already starting to get edged out by the 18, 19-year-olds. And so you think, okay, I should probably retire as an esports player. But then you find Web3 games and there's no one playing them competitively. And you're like, hey, I could be the best player in XYZ game. And all of a sudden you've got an extra 2, 3, 4 years in your esports career, right? So I feel like there's different areas to explore, and definitely a lot more potential for the entire esports space in Web3.
Great. I mean, like, it's sort of like these, sports, typical sports where you play a specific.
You play the Premier League, and then you leave, you go to the MLS, and all of a sudden in the US you're like the best player. It's the exact same thing. Yeah,
so it's interesting to see that same philosophy applied here as well. So with the games, I think we spoke a lot about games. So we'll talk a bit about the gamers now, right? Look at the angle of the games, right? Now, if you're a game developing, in the Web3 space, and you need data, right, to analyze various elements, and that's what our Gamer Passport, which we are, joint working on, is going to enable, essentially with feedback to the game. So games providing data to us on the gameplay, and us providing data back to them on statistical information, gameplay strategies, things like that. So what in your view, like is data that is valuable to a game, when it comes to what is things that they don't natively have within the game, that you think could be valuable?
Yeah, I mean, are we talking Web3?
Yeah, Web3.
Okay, cool. So I think a lot of different touch points that are super important to understand, like I guess the nature of the gameplay itself. Like if you're building a game and it's meant to be, I don't know, a combat game or whatever, it's really interesting to understand, are people playing the stealth type approach? Are people going all out? It's also interesting to see like what items are people, buying, what are the transactions that are going on? Is there a specific preference towards a certain, playing style, for example, because that's when you can start making better decisions moving forward in terms of like what's the next character to launch, what's the next item to drop, should we remove this item or that item, should we nerf this ability or that ability. I think there are so many different touch points that are super important. With Web3 especially, I think it's really important to also understand all the different kind of Web3 angles that come with the game. So for example, the transactions, the wallets, the onboarding, how easy it is, the activity as well. I think something that's super cool that you guys are doing is connecting, the Discord element to the Web3 game as well. And so you can start understanding as a community, who are your most valuable players, right? Like who are your players that are actually super active in the community, but also super active in game. And so it's like you understand that they've got both sides covered, versus like some people are just, they'll talk a lot in Discord, but barely play the game. Other cases, they'll be like hardcore gamers, tryhards, veterans, whatever, but like they barely speak. And so you want these guys to start talking more often, so they can teach other players and kind of help progress the community in general, or whatever, your esports team or whatever. So I think a lot of different touch points that are super essential. As a guild, I guess typically what you're trying to look at is like, the assets, are they being utilized? Are the players using the NFTs, things like that. But for me, if you're really focusing and lasering kind of down on the important stuff, it's the in-game touch points. The transactions, the interactions, all these things, the play styles, etc. And then the player kind of engagement level. So understanding how often are players playing the game on average per session, for example, right? Like a really interesting metric when we did the $10,000 sponsored prize pool with Undead Blocks was every player on average spent 3.5 hours trying to rank on the leaderboard.
3.5 hours.
3.5 hours, because it was a 48-hour tournament, right? So for 3.5 hours, every single player on average was playing the game, trying to get on the leaderboard. That's something to walk away from and say, okay, maybe this game has a fun element to it, replayability, and maybe the prize pool is actually interesting enough that you could reach such a metric, right? Like 3.5 hours in any game in this space right now is like unheard of, right? And so it's metrics like this that are super critical, and I think it also helps games from like an advertising standpoint, because you can then start also customizing and personalizing the ads if you're understanding that your 10,000 players, 90% of them play the assassin play style. Like make more assassin focused content, make more assassin focused marketplace calls to action and things like that, because it doesn't make any sense to then just promote the entire game with all the playstyle. So I mean, data is obviously always gold. That's just something that everyone knows in any industry, and I think the more data you have, the better. But it's about really personalizing and kind of giving context to that data to then help make really well-informed decisions, I would say.
So do you think these social elements, like you were talking about the program which we're doing where we're combining the gameplay with the social element as well, right? How interactive they are. Do you think this data is valuable for a game as well, like to understand the gamers?
100%, yeah, because
interactability?
You can point out who are your most active community members, and so who should you start talking to the most about, campaigns, events, giveaways, AMAs. Like these should become your champions, because they are your ambassadors, right? Like imagine if you're building a game and you know that there's like 100, 200 people that breathe your game daily, that talk about it all the time, that are dropping strategies and things like that in the Discord. They should be the ones you're giving the alpha to. They should be the ones that get the early access. They should be the ones that get your most attention, because they will tell their friends and they'll do your work for you. And so I think it's super critical from a game perspective, from also a community perspective. Like this is how we know who should we focus on the most, because they're adding the most value to the entire community. And it's not just about playing the game, it's also about giving back to the community, right? So I played the game and I think that this strategy worked for me. What do you guys think? Like that's a engagement that's good enough for you to identify. It doesn't have to be, oh guys, I'm the best player, copy me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It could just be like, what do you guys think of this update? I actually don't like this, I don't like that. But just having that social component, I think, brings an element of, real, genuine social moments back to these games, where they actually realize that, oh, they're building for players, they're not building for investors. right?
Exactly, it should be that connection element, right? Like getting down into the flow and understanding the sentiment of the gamers, as they play. So I think that's great input on the games there, Omar. So like I think now basically taking that hat off and putting the hat on of a gamer, right? Of course, I've got a lot of choice now, right? And especially coming into Web3 though, there's not much, right? So looking at these sort of gamers, like in Web3, can we categorize gamers in any way, do you think, into various subgroups? Or is it generally much the same as it used to be in the Web 2 aspect of things?
I think it's pretty similar, but there's an added layer of like the zombie farming guys. Like I don't think that exists in traditional gaming, but I would probably say as you've got like the zombie farming players that are just satisfied with clicking a few buttons and making tokens. You've got the casual gamers that are just trying to have fun and play with their friends and have a good time. And then you've got like the tryhards, like the veterans, the esports players, etc. I think it's still pretty much the same categorization. I think yes, there's definitely less choice, but there's more and more in terms of like choices coming up. And so like Web3 gamers now can feel excited about what's next, but also Web2 gamers can start looking at Web3 games and think, oh, this reminds me of that game, maybe I should check it out. Like what we're now realizing is that it's not about just building a game that no one's ever seen that is like a perfect financial sustainable model. It's about building something that brings back a sense of nostalgia, building something that seems familiar. So when people say, oh, this looks like World of Warcraft, the World of Warcraft players will relate and they'll play it. When people say, oh my god, it's a zombies game, I miss Call of Duty Zombies, like, oh, the zombies players will come play this game. And so that's what you need to start really hitting on, because there are games for everyone already. Like if you look at Steam, there's ridiculous, goat simulator, bee simulator, washing machine simulator. Like there's so many different games for everyone, and it doesn't make any sense to try to go too far off. It just makes sense to kind of do what worked and do it really well, and then add the blockchain technology as kind of the underlying tech. Like I think people, maybe this is going off on a tangent, but people don't realize what blockchain tech can really offer beyond ownership. Like everyone just says ownership. But for example, I'll tell you from an esports side, right? Like if you've ever played a tournament, the hardest part was not winning the tournament, it was getting the money out of the tournament. If you were an esports team, and anyone that's played in an esports tournament will 100% relate. If you played a tournament and you won the prize pool, let's say you won $10,000, it takes you months to get the $10,000.
Wow.
Because they have to talk to your bank, they have to make sure that you're not a minor, they have to make sure that blah, blah, blah. And if you're a kid, then usually you are a kid playing in these tournaments, they have to speak to the parents and the parents' accounts, and it's just like back and forth. And which country are you from? Oh no, that's blacklisted. And like so much ridiculousness that goes on. With the blockchain tech, I'll just give you the example of Undead Blocks again. As soon as the tournament ended and they verified all the results, immediately your prize was in your wallet because it's on the blockchain. And these are things that I feel like we take for granted. We don't really talk about when we say blockchain gaming. Everyone focuses on ownership, but it's like it's as simple as giving esports players their prize pools immediately is such a game changer, because now all of a sudden people don't have a bad experience anymore. People don't think like, oh my god, that tournament organizer is terrible, I'm never going to be part of that tournament again, blah, 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 which happens. A lot of people walk away from, organizers because it took 2 months, 3 months, 4 months to get paid. A lot of people walk from esports teams, from tournament organizers for that specific reason, and now adding that layer, I think it just changes the whole dynamic altogether. Like I'd much rather push that narrative than...
Yeah, well, that's a good point there, right? Like, I mean, the fact that it's instant, right? I think that's a game changer, right? Like, I think for any esports tournament that happens in Web3, being able to get access to your stuff instantly it's a game changer. So, I mean, good point there on the gaming aspect of things. Also, like looking at gamers now, I think one of the other benefits of Web3 games that we can see is the on-chain footprint, right? So you really get a lot of stuff publicly available now, as opposed to locked up inside a game. And previously, I think the first generation of Web3 games didn't really put much stuff on chain due to gas and various other reasons. But now the newer games that are coming up on the L2 chains and basically all EVM chains, which have much better gas, are putting more data on chain, right? To a point where we don't really need to connect to the game anymore to get data out of it, right? So this is going to open up an entire new, I guess, experience for the gamer, because the gamer is now able to get a lot of data out of a game attached to himself as an identity, right? And then be able to use that for something, right? So let's say I have access as a gamer to this. So let's say I'm playing, any of the Web3 games at the moment, Wonder Hero, for example, right? And my data footprint online in the game is coming out. Now, how do you think that would be of value to me as a gamer? Like, is this something that I can, expose to someone, maybe to a guild, or it could be to another game, and will they, benefit from this in any way?
Yeah, I think it's 3 words, right? Proof of play. It was a hot topic that everyone was trying to understand a couple of months ago, where like, how do you really essentially authenticate that players that are joining your guild have played certain games to a certain level, right? Because formerly, or at least it's still actually funny enough done the same way, when you're acquiring assets and now you're looking at players to play with those assets as a guild, you're asking typical questions which are like, what other Web3 games have you played, how much money have you typically made, are you a certain MMR level in Axie, similar questions like that, right? And typically people will send you a screenshot of their account or whatever, but you never know if it's actually their account. You never know if it's a friend's account. You never know if it's a random account on the leaderboard. And so it's almost like you have to give them the benefit of the doubt and then kind of, hope for the best. But with proof of play, it's like it's empowering for the player to then show as almost like their portfolio or their CV or their LinkedIn profile, where it's like, I've played this game. You can authenticate that on chain, that I've reached a certain level, that I've reached a certain number of transactions, that I've made a certain amount of money, that I've progressed to a certain level in the game. And so that becomes really valuable data because you're now a verified player, and you're more likely, it's almost like skipping the tryouts, right? Like you don't have to necessarily prove through screenshots and things like that. You could just verify with the data, everyone's happy, you kind of are technically now a safer bet, right? So it's a lot easier to onboard you. So I think it's a powerful tool from that aspect. It's also, in a way, this is a bit more indirect, but in a way where, let's say, for example, I'm going to walk away from Wonder Hero. So let's talk about Big Time. If you play Big Time, let's say on chain, there's a way to verify that. If you play Big Time, I know that you have a PC with good specs.
Correct.
Right? And so now as a game that demands high quality specs from PC gamer, I know that my target should be anyone that is verified, had played Big Time in the past. And so now all of a sudden the benefit for me as a gamer is I'm getting more personalized, customized ads and games and things like that and campaigns, because they know my specs, they know my capability, they know my interest as well. So you could see, like, if you play Big Time, you might like this other MMORPG, etc., etc. And it no longer has to be like you signing up with your email or identity or giving me your address or whatever. It's just the wallet. You're an MMORPG player, therefore here's an MMORPG ad. The wallet says you have a PC, here's a PC game. The wallet says you only play mobile games, here's a bunch of mobile games. And I think that's super powerful because all of a sudden the experience becomes a lot more personalized. A lot of the games I found, on the PlayStation Store have been recommendations from Sony. So they'll say, because you played God of War, play Horizon. Because you played Horizon, play Last of Us. Because they understand who I am as a gamer, and that's because of all the data that they've tracked from the games I've purchased, downloaded, played, etc., etc. I think now putting that in public, on a public register of everyone being able to verify that information is just super powerful to kind of improve the experience without really risking giving away privacy as well, because you never know my full name, my address, you don't know anything except my wallet and essentially maybe my Discord that's connected to it. That's it.
That's true. So I guess whereas a closed ecosystem before, like Sony, for example, where everything was locked up in there and you could never really take it out and go into another ecosystem, this gives you that ability to move between ecosystems in a frictionless way, right? Because all of your data is now sort of attached to you as opposed to attached to an ecosystem.
100%.
Right? So I think that's the power really, and that's what we are trying to do together as Ethereum and Polkastarter Gaming, to come up with this ability to empower our users, right? The ability to claim that data, be it whatever game that they're playing, and then be able to get access to more preferences, more personalization. But that leads to, the identity aspect, which we spoke about. And that's always been a touchy subject, right? Like, how far do we go down the path of identity?
Yeah.
Because gamers have always been pseudonymous to a great extent. They sort of shy away from that identity aspect. But how do we create this in a way where, we could enrich this profile, for example, right? Even though it doesn't have a physical person attached to it, but it's pseudonymous, but the profile is a singular profile. And I think that's really the key, right? Like having a singular profile that's rich in data, right? So what are your thoughts on the identity piece here? That would be always good to discuss.
I think it's not so much that people shy away from it as much as they don't appreciate the fact they don't have a say in it. So if you ask me, am I comfortable sharing my Twitter and Discord with you as the gamer behind that gamer tag? Maybe I'll say yes. Maybe I'll say no. But you ask, right? Like, I think that's the power in the blockchain and crypto, like the decentralization of it, where it's my decision to then choose to give you what data I want to give you. And if I want to link my Discord and only my Discord, but none of my socials, nothing else, that should be my decision. And I think that should be more than enough for you as well, right? If I'm then happy to give you my Instagram, my Twitter, my Discord, my email, like everything, that's also my decision. Yes. For a lot of people, it's a trade-off, right? Like, you give more data and information, you get more personalized ads and targeting. You give less, you get worse ads and targeting, because they don't know who you are, what you like, or what your interests are. So it's really a trade-off, but I think the power is in the fact that it's our decision, and the fact that it's up to us to then decide, yes, I want to give you this, no, I don't want to give you that. So for example, even if you look at, Ethereum and what you guys are doing, like, potentially, hypothetically, I could also have two separate wallets, and you'd never know my second wallet. And maybe my second wallet is how I interact with Binance and, Pancake Swap and whatever.
Yeah.
I don't want you to know that I make that amount of money or trade that amount of money. I just want you to know that I play video games. Yes. And so that's kind of my decision. Formally, that's not the case, because if you have data about an email, you know exactly where the email is registered, you know exactly what they interact with. Google Chrome is always like spying on stuff, the cookies and so on. And so it's like, yes, you've got this digital identity out there, but you're the product, right? Yes. Like, you are essentially the product of these free solutions. Facebook, Instagram, like all these different social platforms, you are their product, and they're selling your data to advertising companies and agencies and brands. And so I feel like it's giving power back to the players, where it's like, this is how much I'm willing to share. I'm not willing to share the rest. Do with that data as you please. If I want to maybe get it a bit more personalized, I'll give you a tiny bit more. If I feel like I don't appreciate the spam or whatever, I'll take a bit more away as well. I'll just disconnect my Discord or whatever. So I think, yeah, it's about really that kind of, that sense of, I guess, freedom of choice, and kind of the ability to have a say. Formerly, you just never had a say. If you wanted, to be part of any of these ecosystems, you have to sign up with an email. Yes. If you wanted to be part of any of these ecosystems, you had to give them your credit card details, and credit card detail equals, your address, your PO box, etc., etc. But with crypto, it's like, you will never know where I live, who I am, what's my last name, what I had for breakfast. Like, none of that stuff is in the equation, and I think that's a bit refreshing for a lot of people that really care about, decentralization and remaining anonymous online.
Yeah, privacy, I think, and at the end of the day, choice.
Yep.
I think that's the key word here, right? Like you mentioned that so many times. It's really giving you the choice to choose what you want to share.
Yep.
As opposed to not having a say in it at all, and just having one element like your email address, which is tied to so many elements, right? Which you don't have a choice in selecting what you do and don't.
Yep.
But that's key, I think, for gamers in the new Web3 world. It's going to be about choice. It's going to be about, and that's what we strongly advocate as Ethereum as well, like giving that ownership choice and giving that ability, to the end user to choose what they want to share. And you find if you do choose share more, you may benefit more out of it by getting a much better personalized experience. But if you don't want that, you don't want that, right? And that control, I think, if at the end user, with you and me, is the power,
Yep.
and that's always going to be something that I think Web3 is going to be strong in. I think moving forward, right, in this ecosystem. Last but not least, let's cap off with guilds. I think this is always a good subject to end things with. I think we're talking about a massive shift in the whole guild ecosystem.
Yeah. Everyone's favorite and least favorite part of the ecosystem.
Yes, but a lot of positives, a lot of negatives. In fact, this morning we had a chat with one of our investors, and they were so like, why are you focusing on guilds? Guilds are dead. Maybe you should focus on something else. And it's a valid point. We should sit down and think about that aspect as well. Whether we should be focusing time and energy. But I can see that you guys have taken a very different approach to how you run your guild, and I guess setting up the mission and the vision of the guild, right? And it's not been a complete revenue generation model, as opposed to what guilds were set up for that, for one sole purpose, to make money,
Yep.
right? And it completely has shifted now, right? It completely shifted in the way thinking happens, in how revenue comes in, how revenue is distributed. It's all changed, right? And it's going to be a challenging, I guess, time ahead for guilds unless they pivot,
Yep.
right? And look at new ways. So how do you think, guilds need to approach these times coming up with the newer genre of games coming up, which are more fun-oriented, right? Now, how are we going to get guild members? So you mentioned a bit more about guilds becoming potential esports
Yep.
teams, right? I think this is a great stream, right? So Like that, if you have some other thoughts, that I think what you guys are doing and what's unique, as well as what other guilds could sort of do and look at, would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think 100% the model is shifting. Formerly, you just bought assets as a guild, and then you got players to play with those assets to make your return on investment back. It was getting very, very predatory very quickly. I feel like a lot of guilds that would come in with 1,000+ players, if they were extracting value out of your ecosystem, it was just a bleeding token, right? Like you could see the curve was always constantly just going down, and the game couldn't do anything about it because the assets were in their hands, and it's not like you could ask for the assets back. And you can't blame the players for selling their tokens because they've spent time in the game, and that's why they were playing the game. And so it was a very kind of sticky situation. I feel like that got guilds a lot of bad light or bad rep. I don't think it's all bad though. I do think, like you said, you have to evolve, and there are other ways of, essentially making a sustainable guild in terms of like the profits or the business model. I think what we offer as a guild, I don't think about it from a financial perspective. I think maybe where guilds went wrong is the fact that during that hype and craze, they all launched tokens and they all had, a lot of money to play around with. And so kind of they all started making these investments, and all guilds almost serve the purpose of an investor at some point. I feel like guilds should focus on what we do best, which is community. I think that is the big element that you really bring to the picture. The fact that any games that work with us, and I'll tell you what we do in a sec, but any game that works with us doesn't work with us because we have a lot of money. They work with us because we have a lot of players. And that should be the focus, right? Like you can get the money from another VC, you can get the money from anyone else, but you should focus more on the community side and the players. And I think as guilds are now realizing this, because it's not that hard to see, they're starting to shift a lot. And as well with like all the free-to-play games, like what are you going to buy in a free-to-play game? Like I'm sure you can buy land and stuff, but no player actually needs your land unless if like I have to use it to earn. And so it's a bit of a different, I guess, situation from where we were before. But at Polkastarter Gaming, we do a lot of different things. I think one of the main things for us is advisory. So we work with games on an advisory level where obviously we know what the players want because we're very in touch with the community. We work with game studios based out of Japan that have built games like Final Fantasy, Tekken, Street Fighter. So we have the game development knowledge, and then obviously as a Web3 fundraising platform, we have the financial blockchain knowledge as well with tokenomics and in-game economies and things like that. So that's kind of an angle that we take. Another one is obviously investment, but typically not predatory in the sense that there are so many games, and everyone senior in the company probably hates me for this, but there are so many games where we could have probably made a lot of profit on, but we held onto the tokens because we knew the financial consequence of selling that much. Yeah. And I think some guilds have similar relationships with certain games where they know if they were to sell X amount of tokens, that chart was just going to all the way down. Yes. And so we made decisions based on relationships, and they've open doors for us. Like there are certain games where they realized that we were not the value extracting type of guild, and then that opened doors in later fundraising rounds, for example, for us exclusively, primarily because of that reason, where they realized you're in it for us as a game, you're not in it for you as a guild. So that's another way. And then I think just the fact that building a community is already the hardest thing to do in the space. I think if you do that as a guild, there's already so much value that you could get for your community and for yourself as an entity, where we do like content creation now. We've got our own platform that's coming out. Obviously down the line there will be monetization. We're already getting people reaching out and saying, hey, how much does it cost to list our game on your website? We're saying it's free for now, but thanks for the interest. And so I feel like there's definitely a shift. The esports thing is interesting because as a guild, if you invest in training players or equipping them with whatever they need, and then they win the tournaments and you make a cut out of the tournament, that's a much more sustainable, arguably less time consuming way of making money back, right? So if there's a $10,000 prize pool, let's say you win 5,000 of that, you make 10% of that, you've made more money in actual cash than you normally would have playing for a month a certain game. And so I feel like as games start evolving, guilds will have to evolve. I wouldn't say guilds are dead though. I just think it's a shift, and now it's a question of which guild wants to be stubborn and stick to the old approach, and which guild wants to evolve. And we're seeing a lot of the guys around us like Ancient 8 and I think many others with Xborg and things like that are starting to evolve and starting to think about esports and all of these things very seriously. So I would say the model has to shift. The whole landscape has to shift, and even the way we do scholarships is shifting. So quite recently, Big Time is a free-to-play game. but you need to have a PC to play it, like I mentioned earlier. And some of our guys based in the Philippines obviously don't have that in certain parts of the country. Our scholarship model turned into an allowance system where basically we give you, let's say, $10-20 for the month to play in an internet cafe. And then if you get NFTs while playing, you can sell them. You can then decide if you want to continue doing the same thing. You can then say, hey, like, I'm really committed to this game. I want to be one of the best. Let's keep the scholarship model going. Like, we're testing right now as we speak. But I think, it's just about getting creative and understanding what works best for the games. What used to work definitely doesn't work anymore. We haven't announced formal acquisitions or scholarships in a very long time because there's no need to. There are so many free-to-play games now that just doesn't make any sense. It makes more sense to be aligned on other goals. So very long-winded answer there, but I think guilds are shifting. The ones that don't shift will die 100%. So just a matter of time.
Yeah, so very, very long answer, but definitely, I think a lot of points there that you touched on, right? Like the focus, I think the closeness with the games, I think that was really the key there that I sort of understood there was games can benefit a lot from the knowledge and exposure that the guilds have because they're a lot closer to the community.
Yep.
Right, a game could never have those sorts of relationships.
You can't build that community that we've built for 7 months in like 2 weeks before your tournament comes up. And so that's why all these games come to us and they're like, hey, can you retweet this announcement? Can we get on an AMA? Can we do this? Because they know it's extra exposure for them. Yes. Right? We do a lot of favors without getting anything in return because for me, if Undead Blocks does well, the entire space does well. For me, if Big Time does well, the entire space does well because everyone starts improving. And so for us, like, that's why I say the hardest part is building a community. And so you should really focus on adding value there rather than trying to focus on adding value because you've got some treasury with millions of dollars and you'll acquire the NFTs and things like that. I think it's a bit ridiculous. Obviously, it makes sense financially as a model, but maybe not moving forward, at least.
Great. So I think we're just about running out of time. So I'll just do a bit of a wrap up. I think we spoke about many different things, games, gamers, guilds, all part of the ecosystem as a whole. And I think our collaboration, has really now gone to the next level where we're looking at picking a selected gamer set now and then, ideating how we can do that. We're almost set up with the DAO as well. So hoping to get you guys a bit more involved in that, where we could, basically work out how this data that we are collecting could be, used in some fashion and the value and ascertaining the value of this data. So we're going to analyze that a bit more as time goes by. So thank you very much, Omer. Really, really a pleasure having you here with us in our first in-person event. It was really nice to speak to you a bit more about the games, and then would love to catch up with you again, of course. I think with the newer games coming out, a lot of games coming out, I think it'd be good to see how they come out and how they adapt and how they change with the new demands that players have, which has sort of also changed in a way. But do you have any closing statements before we wrap up?
Yeah, just thank you guys for having me. Obviously, this was a lot of fun. I always enjoy having these conversations, and these questions always bring more and more ideas to my mind. So I really appreciate what you guys are doing as well. I think for the longest time we were trying to identify a partner that was going to help from like a data, / digital identity standpoint, and I think you guys are doing a great job. And we're super excited to start off with Wonder Hero, obviously, as the first game that we incubated, and then kind of looking forward to other games that you guys will launch. So yeah, super happy to have this chat, and thank you obviously for hosting me and for the chat.
Thank you very much, Omer. All right, until next time then. Thank you.